Well, hi again, everyone. Here with another video again, here in Caribscope. Thank you guys for looking over the videos that I've put up recently. I know there have been some views. I know a lot of you may have not watched the entire videos. That's perfectly fine. Somewhere along the line, someone may stumble on them and find something interesting or worth their time in terms of watching the video. Now, I have to say, and I have to admit, that I was expecting a little bit more from you guys, man. I was expecting a little bit more. Some of you have made an attempt. Some of you have contributed. Some of you have put some things down in the comments in terms of either rebuttals or thoughts or things I can look at to perhaps maybe reconsider my somewhat critical. I want to say critical. I don't mean it in a bad way, like let's not use the word critical, but for me, questioning beliefs of the Hebrew Israelites. That's pretty much what I've done. I've put questions out there. I've put my own thoughts on some of these things, and the best I've gotten from some of you are, one guy, like I said in the video yesterday, said somebody must be paying this fool, referring to me. Of course, he makes the comment, one sentence, and there's not one word, one typed word of anything to refute anything I said in the video. Just basically, hey, somebody's paying this fool. Right? So again, the dismissive argument. Someone else mentioned today, what did they say? Sellout. I'm a sellout. Which implies that if I don't believe what he believes, I don't agree with what he agrees with, then somehow I'm a sellout. Or if I don't buy into this narrative the Hebrew Israelites have out there, then I am somewhat of a sellout. Don't know how he was able to determine that, because I don't know sellout to whom, because I'm still a black man. That hasn't changed. I'm still proud of being a black man. That hasn't changed. I'm still proud of being born in the Caribbean. Really, that hasn't changed, because anyone who knows me knows I wear that out on my sleeve. So I don't know a sellout to who or whatever, because the whole point that I was trying to make well, I shouldn't say the whole point, but one of the points that I made in one of my videos is that whether or not I accept Hebrew Israelite teachings, it does not change the fact that I am a black man, and I'm proud to be. So I can actually do two things: not believe in Hebrew Israelite theology or whatever they believe, and still be a proud black man. That's one. Two, I can not believe in Hebrew Israelite teachings, or I may go ahead and say, hey, perhaps I am a descendant of the ancient Israelites. I don't know. I mean, of course, a part of my DNA says that I'm Jewish, but, that's a whole other story. I can go ahead and say I am a descendant of Hebrew Israelites and still don't believe any of the other teachings. I don't go to their church, or I may not go to their church. I may not accept any of their teachings, the way you dress, the way you eat, whatever, believing in the biblical God and all that stuff. And I could still be a very proud black man. So when the person say I'm a sellout, I don't know a sellout to whom. I don't exactly know where he got that idea from. But it just sounds like, you don't believe what I believe, so you must be a sellout. Makes no sense. Another person came in and she said, are you basically sincerely searching for the truth? I never said that I was coming in here to search for the truth, because I don't believe what the Hebrew Israelites have is the truth. Because I don't believe in the Bible, first of all, and that's the book they use as their basis for their beliefs. So I'm not looking for the truth. I'm not looking for that whatsoever. I'm questioning their interpretation of the truth in some of these videos. So they have made statements. I mean, of course, they're not bothering me. The Hebrew Israelites are not coming to my door and pounding on my door and bothering me, and I feel like the urge that I've got to respond to them. They're not creating videos to talk to me and call me out by my name, and I feel the urge to respond. These are just videos that I'm just doing on my own, because again, It's a public belief that they have. They let the world know what they believe, and I hear what they believe, and I decide to come to video and to YouTube and say, well, listen, this is what they believe. Let's talk about it. Is there anything wrong with that? I'm not pleading to them to say, hey, come give me the truth. Let me know what the truth is. And if I disagree, it's like, well, you don't really want to know the truth. So, it could be a little crazy down there in the comment section sometimes. But what I would really wish, there have been a few people who've come in and actually made some statements. Some people have come in and said some things that, like, I don't know what they're talking about, and all these esoteric terms and putting scriptures in big capital letters, and I don't even know what that even means. But some people have come in and contributed. One guy, of course, did a video where it was a response video to my first video in this series, and said he only watched 7 minutes of the video. A video that was about 30 minutes long, I think it was even longer, said he only watched 7 minutes, but he created a 30-minute video to critique 7 minutes of video that he watched. So he never watched the video all the way through. Hopefully by now he has. So I haven't heard anything from the person since, because I think I responded back to them, and I haven't heard anything since. So I would like to know what his thoughts are if he actually watched the entire video. Okay. Well, there's another topic today I want to talk about, and it's not necessarily about the Hebrew Israelites, but it's kind of in the same ballpark of black pride, African pride. And when I talk about this is me just trying to be as objective as possible. And you will notice that I'm being objective here, all right? But I'm also understanding and taking my mind back to a world of 1,300 years ago, if I'm doing my math right. I could be wrong. But I'm taking my mind back then and trying to detach myself from the world I live in now with our accepted principles, what we consider moral, immoral, whatever, and throwing myself all the way back into time and trying to basically grasp a world back then. One of the things I do realize is that the ancient world, the medieval world, a world not too long ago, it was just a violent place to be in. The world was more or less conquer or be conquered. Still out there today, to be honest with you, where the United States, for example, tries to dominate the world, or they get angry at rivals that rival their power, and it's like, no, we want to dominate in this region, we want to dominate in this place, we want to dominate on this sphere, and you're threatening whatever. But in the ancient world, that's how it was. It was more or less like conquer other people or be conquered by other people. So it was like you had these ambitious leaders that rose up, and before you know it, they're knocking off a couple of the tribes around them. They're neighboring tribes, and it's like, hey, the thirst for power, let's move further. Let's go after another tribe. Let's remove these other people. Let's conquer this other land. Let's go here. Let's go there. And before you know it, they had empires, whether it be Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and the Babylonian Empire, Sennacherib and the Assyrian Empire, or the Egyptians and their empire, or Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire, or Alexander the Great and the Grecian Empire, or the various Roman emperors and the Roman Empire, Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire, up to relatively modern times of the British Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire. So you had ambitious people who went and conquered other parts of the world and put them under their thumb. So it was all about more or less conquering or just being conquered. It was going to go either way, the way that the world was back then. Well, one thing that you would hear every now and again, in this pursuit of black excellence, black pride, something to look at from Africans or black people. So black people today, some black people today can feel proud to look at something and say, well, look at what we did. It's the talk about the Moors. And the Moors, as we know now, are people who, prior to the Muslim conquest, the Arabian conquest of northern Africa, These were the original peoples that lived in that area, spreading down into sub-Saharan Africa. The Romans called the people that lived along the northern rim of Africa, because of course they didn't really know or venture anywhere below the Sahara or even beyond the coastline. So they called those people over there Moors. And we have the name of the country of Mauritania in northwestern Africa, which the name Moors is a part of that name. So they call them Moors. Well, by the time of the Muslim conquest and the spread of Islam across northern Africa in the 600s and 700s AD or CE, they spread throughout that area and conquered the local people and forced conversion onto them. So these people eventually became Muslims, born in Africa or from Africa, from the African continent, but they have now adopted forcefully the Muslim religion. Now in 711 CE or AD, however you want to look at it or call it, the Moors from northern Africa or northwestern Africa, more or less the western third of Africa, North Africa, they, with of course the Arabs in command, the Moors as making up most of the army, but I guess you put all these people together, I guess you would say the Muslim armies of northwestern Africa crossed over the Straits of Gibraltar and crossed over into what we call Spain and Portugal today. The peninsula that both of these places sit on is known as Iberia. They crossed over and they eventually conquered much of that land that we call Iberia today, or much of what we call Spain and Portugal today. I think they tried to get as far as over into France, but Charlemagne drove them back. And as he drove them back over into the Iberian Peninsula across the Pyrenees Mountains, they pretty much occupied, I want to say, about a good 95, even more than that, 97, 98% of the land of Iberia. The only place that was left was just beyond the Pyrenees Mountain in a place known as Asturia. And remember, the majority of people living in Iberia at the time, prior to the conquest, they were Visigoths, or you could say they were Christians. So these Muslim hordes and armies crossed over the Strait of Gibraltar over into Iberia and forced the Christians who could escape up to the very northwestern rim of Iberia, beyond the Pyrenees Mountains as a barrier, and that place was known as Asturias. That was the kingdom of Asturias. That was the last place that the Christians could hold on to. Meanwhile, for the next 800 years, the Muslims dominated, to certain degrees, certain levels, parts of, or all of, or much of the land or the peninsula of Iberia. By 1492, when they were driven out, the only place they still were occupying was the southern portion of what we call Spain today, known as Granada. Eventually, the Christians from Asturia eventually start spreading out and retaking, going south, retaking back the land from the Muslims. And this effort was known as the Reconquista. Now, it started pretty much right away, but it took 800 years for them to finally complete the Reconquista, or the Reconquista, to reconquer, take back what they called their land, or what was originally the lands of their ancestors. And they drove the Muslims out, drove them back into northwestern Africa, drove them back over into, at the time, the Ottoman Empire further east. Of course, the Jews of that time were also there, and they were also put in a position where they were driven out. Either accept Christianity or get out of here. Some Jews accepted, became known as crypto Jews, and a lot of Jews were forced out and banished from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain in 1492, and from the Kingdom of Castile, I guess you can call it that before it really became Spain. The Kingdom of Castile and Aragon told them to get out. Over in the Kingdom of Portugal, what we call Portugal today, 4 years later, I think in 1496, they also issued their pronouncement to tell the Jews to get out of their country or their kingdom. So they all left. Now I say all of that just to give a pretty quick history, but there's this talk about the Moors and we beat our chests, and a lot of black people look at that and say, look at the Moors, look at what they did. Because the end part of that is usually this, and it is true, that when the Moors came into southwestern Europe, over into Iberia, they brought with them knowledge. They brought with them advances that eventually trickled down into that area of Iberia, bringing a beautiful civilization to that area, beautiful architecture, the knowledge of things like algebra, the knowledge of writing on paper. They brought all of this with them and more or less civilized the area to the point where that civilization there in Iberia, or a place known as Andalus, that was the Al-Andalus, that was the name that the Muslims gave the land of Iberia, Al-Andalus. That from there, it spread out to other places. In fact, one of the people who would become Pope actually traveled, I think he was French, I may be wrong, but he actually traveled to Andalusia, learned a lot, and came back, just came back with a head full of knowledge, and became one of the more intelligent popes that there was. So civilization was brought. So you would hear a lot of black people saying, well, look at the Moors. They brought civilization to southwestern Europe, while the Europeans were still going through their dark ages in Al-Andalus, where the Muslims were in southwestern Europe, and beyond, their influence spread. And because their influence spread, they helped to bring Europe out of the dark ages. There is a lot of truth to that. And that is one of the more fascinating legacies of the Moorish occupation of Iberia. But there's one big gigantic elephant in the room that is never mentioned, and that is this. The Moors didn't walk into Iberia and say, hey, can we spend some time here? Can we spend 800 years here, guys? Can we ask you permission? No. They came in the form of a conquest. That means blood had to be shed. That means taking other people's lands. That means subjugating the local population. And of course, when they did that, there was a hierarchy. Muslims up here, I'm sure most of them were Arabs, and then the Jews and the Christians below that. But it was really an 800-year occupation. Now, in today's world, we would look around and we would say, that's wrong. That should not have happened. What's up with that? You don't just go in and take over other people's lands. So when we talk about the civilization part, when we talk about the knowledge that they brought to this area, it was like the Visigoth says, hey, come over and teach us stuff. No, it was a conquest. It was an invasion and a conquest of other people's lands. Drove the people out, sent them running, and whoever was around subjugated them. You better accept Islam. At least that's the way it was. But the Jews and the Christians, they were somewhat in a similar type of situation, but the Moors more or less left them with their own religion and basically called them the people of the book. But if they did not accept Islam, then they had to pay it. They can still follow their worship and everything discreetly, but they had to pay a tax if they were not Muslims. So now the other thing is, we're going to come into your country, into your land. We're going to take over your land. And if you don't accept our religion, we're going to tax you for not accepting our religion. Not going to kill you off, but because, the Muslims are not stupid. Let's kill all these people. We need these people to actually keep an economy going over here. But we'll keep them around. But you have to pay a tax. You've got to pay us money for not being a Muslim. Again, if we had to look at it through our modern scope, we'd be like, that was completely wrong what they did. You should not be invading other people's countries, occupying their country, subjugating the people, and then forcing the people in their own country to pay a tax to you because they don't want to accept your religion. But that is hardly ever discussed, because in terms of black pride, we put it over. Look at what we brought to the Europeans. Look at how we enlightened them. Now just imagine it was said the other way around, because I have heard it, where you have Europeans who came over to this side of the world, met the people in Mesoamerica offering human sacrifices to their gods. This repulsed the Europeans, even though in their ancient times they did the same thing. But it repulsed the Europeans, and it's like, oh my God, these people are uncivilized and whatever. Now, what if they should jump up and say, well, at least we brought civilization to the people. We got them to stop all of that stuff. We introduced them to Jesus, and we didn't believe in all that sacrificial stuff, what they're doing, killing babies or virgins or whatever they were doing to appease their gods. They could look around and say, well, we brought civilization. Yeah, okay, well, it wasn't pretty, but yeah, we brought some civilization to them. We made them put clothes on. We'd be looking at them and saying, well, we don't care what you thought you came and did. You exploited these people. You murdered some of them, well, quite a bit of them, and you killed off the rest of them with your diseases. We don't care what you think about them. But when it comes to the Moors now coming in, we only look at the fact that they brought civilization, ignoring the big elephant in the room, that it was a conquest. It was I'm going to come into your country, invade it, take it over, spread our religion, and if you don't accept it, we're not going to kill you, but you're going to have to pay us a tax. Now, another thing is, when it comes to the Moors, it does not mean that Africa did not have advancements. We know that there were African empires that definitely had those great advances. Those advances were not necessarily, as far as we know, in northwestern Africa. They were in northeastern Africa, in places like Egypt, in places like Nubia, Kush. We know of it in in Western Africa, in places like the Mali Empire. Well, those came later on, the Songhai Empire, the Ghana Empire. We know of civilizations probably down in South Africa, Southeast Africa, the Zimbabwe, great civilization down there. Northwestern Africa, prior to that, there was no big, it was just pretty much just desert out there. Until they maybe discover some great civilization back when. Well, there was Carthage. So let me change that. But now, a lot of that stuff that ended up in Andalusia didn't necessarily come out of Africa. It was, Africa served as the conduit, as the highway in which it eventually arrived into Andalusia or Iberia. But a lot of that stuff came from the Far East. For example, algebra didn't come from Africa. It actually came from Persia. So here's what happened. When the Muslims were spreading around, conquering, they ended up in places like close to China, the Indian subcontinent, Indonesia, older civilizations that had been doing things long before the Europeans, or civilizations that existed around the same time as the great older ancient African empires. And when they went and conquered these people, they encountered advances that these people had, like the Chinese were already using paper to write, all that type of stuff, fireworks, gunpowder. And they met these people, sometimes they conquered, or sometimes just through association, learned certain things. And that information that they gathered in places like the Far East or Persia places where they conquered, which we call Persia, which we call Iran today, they eventually brought that information back to the West. Because remember, Islam started in the desert, out in Saudi Arabia, amongst a bunch of primitive tribes. And as they began conquering, and they knew how to at least wield a sword, ride horses, as they went out conquering, they eventually encountered information and knowledge that they did not know anything about prior. And as they conquered, that information then trickled along the Muslim highway, so to speak, across northern Africa, and eventually made it over into Andalusia, which then eventually led to the great civilization that existed there under the Muslims or the Moorish occupation of Iberia. So we got to get some credit, not to say that the African Moors did not, but they were more or less the carriers, the bringers. They were more or less the one who came and said, Europe, here is civilization. But a lot of that stuff that they brought actually came from clear across the world in the Far East, in the Indian subcontinent, and up in places like Iran and Persia. And it's funny, you heard me mention something about my cousin in my other video, and he just sent me something else. I tell you, he sends me a lot of attachments, a lot of pro-African things, and so on. So, just like I said, there he is. So, this is pretty much what happened there. So we can look back and we can say, yes, the Moors brought civilization, brought knowledge, brought information into southwestern Europe, built a beautiful civilization there, because I love that architecture, that Moorish the footprint that they left there. It's beautiful to look at. It really is. And while you cannot say by any stretch of the imagination that the Moorish occupation of that land was anything like the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand that it's pretty much when that Moorish population, when that Moorish civilization came to an end, and their control came to an end, and Spain and Portugal finally broke away. Get off of us. Get out of here. Started to flex their wings. Some of that knowledge that they got is that very same knowledge that they used to go out there to navigate those seas and to start spreading their wings. And the Portuguese, as we know, eventually started trickling down and moving out a little further. Let's get off of this land. Let's move out over the waters. And they eventually made it further and further down the western coast of Africa, which eventually led to what became the transatlantic slave trade. So it wasn't like the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, just happened in a vacuum. It was a culmination of history prior to that point. And the history that drove it and brought it to that point is what then pushed it further on and forward into history. That whole 800 year of Moorish occupation and all the information that they brought there played a role in what the Spanish or the Castilians or the, from Aragon, the Kingdom of Castile, and what the Portuguese and everything eventually learned over that time. They used that knowledge to then eventually expand themselves and became dominant powers in the world back then, which in process of doing this, they depended on the transatlantic slave trade to make them a lot of money and build the wealth of their empires. So again, when I think of these things, it is fascinating to me, because again, when I remove myself out of the equation and going with it, like I want to hate those white people, what did they do wrong now? When I kind of remove that and just look at it objectively, yes, I can feel a particular way about how people were treated and what happened back then. But when I kind of put that on the side, put my feelings on the side and just look at history, look at its complexities, look at the idea that people were just out there, because again, if I was living back then and I had the ambition of some of those leaders back then, maybe I might not have cared about my next door neighbor to go ahead and capture them and sell them off to other people to be enslaved. Maybe I would not have cared like a Shaka Zulu. I don't care who you guys are. I'm out here to conquer. I am out here to spread I am out here to show how great I am. And power may get to my head. And I may take my people and let us conquer another group of people. Take over their land, take over their animals, take over their women. We don't care. That was the world back then. So just something to think about. Just a different thought today. Let's go on at a different level. So black pride, yes. The Moors, it's a lot you can look at and say, yeah, it was impressive what they did. But the big elephant in the room is, look at what they had to do to get to where they were, to leave their legacy behind. They had to shed blood. They had to kill other people. They had to invade other people's lands to get to that point. Now we can sit back and say, well, we don't care about that and whatever. Look at what they did. But always kind of keep this in mind. And just keep it in mind that the Europeans, just imagine if the Spanish and the Portuguese and their descendants should get up today and say, hey, we want reparations for what you guys did. You came in here, you did this, you killed off my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandmother. You drove them out of their lands and whatever. We want this back and you better pay us back. And I mean, that's a whole complex mess, and that would turn into one big disastrous nonsense and whatever, you know. But hey, that ancient world, it was crazy as hell. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning into this video. Let me know your thoughts on this. All right? I would greatly appreciate it. You guys take care. Until the next video.